All right. So here we have the ROG Phone 6 Pro. I'm not a gamer, so this phone honestly has no real interest to me, or I'm not interested in it. But I will say I've watched this video once and I was half paying attention to it. But I can never get away from, and I need to, but one of the videos he made a while ago with regards to the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III, and he, called that an enthusiast phone, which I feel like by the time I finished watching the video, I feel like there were maybe one or two things where I could have gotten on board with calling that phone an enthusiast phone. But this is an enthusiast phone. This is a phone meant for gamers, specifically for gamers. Whereas Sony's, I feel like they're attempting to do something with cinematography, but at the end of the day, I think all smartphones, well, not all, but non-budget smartphones are trying to do something with cameras and making them look good on the phones. But anyway, let's get after it. This video of his is only 9 minutes. Who knows how long mine is going to be because we're already a minute into it and I haven't even pressed play yet. So let's get started.
Alright, what's up? MKBHD here. So, this is the ROG Phone 6 Pro. I just want to start off just by reading you the specs of this phone that I'm holding in my hand right here, okay? So, it has a 6.8-inch, 165 hertz AMOLED display. It's got a second OLED screen on the back, too. Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen...
I had to pause it because I wasn't sure if those sound effects were him or something else on the phone. So, yeah, sorry for the interruption. Those sound effects are coming from him.
One chip, which has cores running at 3.2 gigahertz, 18 gigabytes of RAM, 6,000 milliamp hour battery with 65 watt fast charging, dual front facing stereo speakers, triple cameras, including a 50 megapixel main camera, and two USB-C ports, and a headphone jack.
All right, so just off of what he just said, would this not be considered an enthusiast phone? I feel like he does use the word once or twice in the duration of his video, but for the amount of times he used it in that Sony video, which as an owner of a Sony device, I don't feel like I'm an enthusiast at all. I like their product, but I'm not an enthusiast to the point of calling it an enthusiast phone or whatever. So, I know I'm going to struggle even trying to comment on this thing, mainly because, as I mentioned before, I don't have much interest, but I figured I'd give it a try and see what I can pull out of, I don't want to say thin air, but essentially that's what I'm doing. A phone I have no interest in, just curious to see what his perspective on it is. But the 18 gigabytes of RAM, all right, I mean, some of my computers don't have them. In fact, only one of them has more. Well, I only have two right now, but one has 8. And the other one has, I think, 20? Or, no, 24. I think that's 24 in it. So yeah, it's 18 gigabytes RAM and a phone. I mean, come on. Two USB-C ports, a 6,000 milliamp hour battery. This is definitely a phone for gamer enthusiasts.
Thanks for watching. Now, this phone's specs are ridiculous, and they're ridiculous because it's a gaming phone. And with a lot of these gaming phones in the past few years, you could really say they were focused on one true goal, to just be as
And I'd say it's a gaming enthusiast phone.
great for gaming as possible. But with the latest generations, you can kind of tell they actually have two goals now: to be incredible with gaming, and to also be really great to live with as a daily driver. Luckily, a lot of what makes a phone great for gaming also makes it great for using in everything else. But there are still definitely some challenges, as you'll see in a second. It's kind of like how sports cars back in the day notoriously used to be, super difficult to drive, tough manual gearbox, really harsh ride. Great for some high performance fun, but you wouldn't want to drive it every single day like that. And so in that analogy, the ROG phone is like a Porsche 911.
So I'm not a car guy, but I can understand at least what he's saying with regards to older sports cars. But I feel in the realm of smartphones, I don't think we were. I mean, I think I've used a decent amount. I haven't used nearly as many as he has, nor have I reviewed really much of any. But I don't think we ever were to the point where you needed a phone, and I'll say smartphones, yeah, where you had a phone that wasn't suitable for being an everyday phone, and then if it offered something else, then great. Um, there might have been one of the previous ROG phones that had an issue or something. Again, I haven't really paid much attention to them, but as I think about all the things that I own now, and all the phones I've owned, even from like my first very smartphone, which was a Sony, not a Sony, HTC Aria, and yeah, like it was what a smartphone was back in 2010 or 11 or whatever year it was. I had, Blackberries before then, where yeah, that's kind of what a smartphone was, of that time. So I just don't know if we ever had a situation where somebody would need to carry two phones simply because one phone wasn't sufficient enough to provide the conveniences of a phone worthy of everyday use. I almost say, and this is a stretch because it technically does do everything, but it just might be a nuisance, is as I'm sitting here looking at this Microsoft Surface Duo, I wouldn't use it as an everyday phone, but I could, once I put you put your SIM card in there, it runs Android. There's no reason that you couldn't use it as a phone for everyday use. But yeah, personally, I would get annoyed by having to open it every time to actually interact with it, because there are no screens on the outside. There's nothing you can do with it while it's closed. I can imagine that if you had a Bluetooth headset or a smartwatch connected to it and somebody called or somebody sent you a message, you would get notifications that way. You can probably talk through the watch or through your headset without having to open the phone. But it seems like it would be a hassle. And when I'm looking at this ROG phone, which is just a regular slab like everything else, it does a bunch of other crap that you probably don't need. But at the end of the day, if you aren't a gamer, then you'll be able to just use it every day as a phone. No issues whatsoever, would be my guess.
Where it's taken the high performance stuff, but it's also easier to daily drive. At least it would like to be a Porsche 911. So as far as performance goes, as crazy as it sounds, there's really not that much to say here. This is now the fastest phone I've ever used, not even on paper, but just as far as pure responsiveness and feeling like my every touch and input is immediately responded to. This sets the benchmark now for me. I drag my finger across the display and everything moves about as perfectly one-to-one as I've ever seen. Scrolling, animations, opening up apps, multitasking, all that stuff. It's just crazy fast. It's the new chip, of course, the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1, but also this is now the fastest screen I've ever used, the 165 hertz display.
And I'm sorry, I should probably work on my editing skills, but that'll be for another day. But just off the two things you just mentioned, the Snapdragon Gen 1 Plus, I think is the latest Snapdragon chip. And then the screen with, I think you said 165 hertz refresh rate. I do specifically remember watching that video about the Sony Xperia. And those were two specs that he mentioned, were the refresh rate of the screen, and the other thing he just mentioned, which, wow, how did I forget that fast? Um, yes, my memory. Wow. So the Snapdragon Gen 1, or 8 Gen 1, and then also combined with a 165 hertz refresh rate for the Sony, which at this point is a couple years old, well, I'm a year and some change old. It had a 120 hertz display. It was a 4K panel, but then it had, I think it has the Snapdragon 888. And those were two things that he was like, oh, these are enthusiast level specs. And I don't know why that word just bothers me so much, because as far as I'm concerned, with the exception of maybe the Sony Xperia Pro, and I think there was like a second generation of that or something, like those are true like professional level devices, where everything else Sony's making are just consumer grade devices. Like they add their little, specs to it, their camera tricks that they're trying to do and whatever. But it's not an enthusiast phone. It's just, you buy this because you like their product, which everything that he mentioned, and everything that I've observed from using the little brother of that phone, just means it's a good product. And some of those things are things that these other manufacturers have taken away just to cut some cost. And then also potentially, like the headphone jack, making you in turn buy their Bluetooth product. So if this ROG phone isn't an enthusiast phone, I can't see how any of the Sony products would. And I know this video isn't about Sony products, mine or his, but it's one of those things where I am still shocked as to how many people watched what he made two, and I forget which one was which, but one of them had like 7 million views. And yeah, it was a really good video. So no knock on him or anything, but I'm just surprised that that many people would care to find out either something about the Sony Xperia 1 Mark II or why people don't buy Sony phones, which I think that video was about the Sony Xperia Mark III, or I probably have them backwards. But either way, 7 million views for a phone that nobody's going to buy, which is very, very interesting. So seeing this phone, I was like, man, what is he going to say? Is he going to use the word enthusiast as many times? And with those two specs he just mentioned, you have to put that title on this. And I think again, once he says it, I think I'll pause it and then have my little 2 cents on that.
And it's running with a 720 hertz touch sampling rate. That's double last year, which brings the touch latency down to 23 milliseconds. So you really.
And from what I've heard, again, I'm no expert, when it comes to that touch sampling rate, usually that's just twice what the refresh rate is. So for it to be 720 and the refresh rate on the actual panel is only 165, I believe. That's what, 4 times? Yeah. So however they did it, I mean, I don't understand the science behind it, but yeah, like these are enthusiast level specs.
Notice things just follow your finger around the screen being super tight and everything being real snappy across the board. If it's synthetic benchmarks you care about, here they are. They'll show you it is slightly more powerful and also slightly more power efficient than the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, and technically still behind the iPhone 13. But I'm telling you right now, 9 times out of 10, the ROG feels faster than anything else. And then even with the little stuff, this phone just goes all the way to the max for performance. It has UFS 3.1 storage. It has LPDDR5 RAM instead of DDR3. It even has Wi-Fi 6E. Any spec that you can think of at the very max, this phone has it. So I don't even have to be a hardcore gamer or a PUBG enthusiast or anything to understand that if you throw a game at this phone, it's probably going to be able to handle it. So I'm going to leave the gaming testing to the gaming enthusiasts. But then, what about all?
See? So you said it, gaming enthusiast. So this is a phone for enthusiasts. And one of the things that I personally have issue with when it comes to Sony is that they don't market their stuff. I mean, they'll announce it in whatever month, and then they'll release it months later. And by that point, what hype they had attempted to generate has long since died down. And the phones also aren't sold in stores. I think I was able to buy a Sony Xperia 10 in a Best Buy, or maybe I saw it in Best Buy and ended up buying it online. But either way, you have to buy these phones online, and that's really detrimental. So I don't know how you buy one of these ROG phones, but I can imagine it's not going to be in a carrier store.
The time that you're not gaming? That's probably even more time than when you actually do play games on the phone. How does the sports car drive when it's not on the track? Spoiler alert, pretty good. There is 18.
We was about to say 18 gigs of RAM because I see it on the screen, but yeah, like there's no reason to think that you wouldn't have a good experience. And I mean, with the exception of what was that one phone? And it wasn't even real. It was, I don't know, some kid. I think he was like a Bitcoin millionaire or something, and he claims he created his own phone that allowed. What was it, man? It essentially it using the App Store on that phone, you wouldn't be, I guess, not right. What's moderated the same way as if you use the Google App Store or the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store. And at the end of the day, it was just a fork of Android and whatever app store they were using, which people found out what it really was, and the experience on that phone might have been detrimented. And the reality of the situation is If you're running iOS, you have the App Store and you're good to go. End of story. If you're running Android and you have Google Play services, you're probably also good to go. So, with the exception of that phone that I just mentioned, which I believe was not running Google Play services, and I think there's some phones outside of the country who are running Android that also do not have access to Google Play services. Those phones will be problematic. But this one in particular, yeah, like just looking at the specs, 512 gigs of storage, 18 gigs of RAM, the refresh rate, the battery size, two USB-C ports. Like, there's no reason that the phone wouldn't be fine. Like, I can't think of something that would be problematic based on the heightened specs of the phone.
18 gigs of RAM in this phone, like I said. Do you really need 18 gigs of RAM to play a single game? No, I don't think so. I think that's for the headline. But lots of RAM does help with multitasking. So I find myself using the phone flipping back and forth.
Okay. And multitasking, like this is just a personal lack of understanding I can imagine. I mean, I have a lot of phones. I use individual phones for individual reasons. And at the end of the day, if I truly need to be productive, I then go to a computer. So, I mean, he just gave the example of uh, switching between apps or having multiple apps open. Like, I get it. But I mean, yeah, you don't, 18 gigs is definitely overkill. And regardless of what he's going to say next, or even this phone in particular, I am just curious as to why or when people are truly multitasking, what exactly are they doing? And is it convenient? Is it comfortable? I mean, I know that the touchscreen, as far as I'm concerned, is a limiting way of doing things. It's so narrowly focused. True multitasking doesn't really happen. I mean, it's all right, I'm doing this, then let me flip back to this other app and do something if I'm copying or pasting or whatever. Whereas it's so one dimensional. Whereas when I'm on a computer, I can have two apps up side by side. Maybe and at that point it's a lot easier. Using the mouse and the keyboard just makes the experience way, way, way more better, and I feel way more efficient. And that's where I always get lost. Is like, well, wait a minute. If you need to truly get something down, I get you might be, not sitting at a desk or you might be somewhere else. If assuming finances aren't an issue, go get yourself go to a computer. Go home, or if you're out and about, you probably have a laptop. I'd hate to even say you have a tablet, which I mean, but again, just having a bigger screen and then also having the ability to have a an actual mouse input and keyboard input just seems to make more sense. So I'd like to see. I mean, if there's an app out there, I'm sure it does exist. What would it take for all 18 gigabytes of that RAM to be consumed? Like what would a user actually have to be doing? And yeah, and even after I saw that, I'm like, well, the screen is only 6 inches and some change. So even though you've officially filled up the RAM, you're still really only doing one thing at a time, and you have to go back and forth between the apps. And I know some of these taller phones, and at least on the Sonys, I don't know about other tall phones, you can have two apps open simultaneously by just splitting the screen in half. Cool, I guess. But again, like at that point, you've taken an already small screen and made it even smaller, attempting to multitask, and just the overall experience seems like it's going to be absolute trash. So I am a huge proponent, and that's what these last 3 minutes have been about. It's just, if you have a phone, cool. Use it however you see fit. Cool. But if you need to be productive, go find yourself a computer, whether it's your own, whether it's family members or friends, the schools, the public libraries. I don't know, something. I mean, of course, using public computers, I understand that the hesitation. But I don't know how much this phone costs. Maybe he'll say it at the end. But yeah, as I try to skate around, well, some people don't have the financial means, which I completely understand. But if you're buying this phone, you do have the financial means. So don't buy such an expensive phone. Buy something cheaper, and then go get yourself a laptop.
Between 5 or 6 open apps, easy. It keeps up, no problem, keeps them all open. This is also the best display yet on a gaming phone, not just in refresh rate, but in brightness and overall quality. They keep getting better. This is a Samsung built AMOLED panel that they've tuned to be really, really fast, but it's still got improvements in color accuracy. It's HDR10 Plus certified, and it gets up to 800 nits. It's not quite flagship levels, but very usable outdoors and in most environments. The haptics are way better. This is one of the things that was bad in the last phone, but they turned the haptics all the way up. They've got a new motor in here, and so anytime.
And that's something that I definitely underappreciated until I had a phone with bad haptics. And this was in the era once haptics have gotten good. So at one point we all had crappy haptics. I mean, you just had a standard vibration motor in the phone. It would vibrate. You'd be like, oh, cool. I got a text message or a call or whatever. And then I don't know who was the first company to truly dedicate time and effort into it. I know Apple did at a point, so they might have been the first, might not have been. But when they came up with their haptic engine, it definitely changed the game, and it's important. So I don't know how bad the haptics were in the previous ROG phone, but if they're improved, good to hear. But from using the iPhone and another phone now that I really enjoy the haptics on are the Samsung Galaxy S22. Really, really satisfying. Whatever they've done, really, really satisfying. The Sony, I don't really care for it too much. And I also had a Pixel 4a that I recently sold. I didn't really care for the haptics too much in that. And this Surface, it vibrates sometimes, but I don't really care for it either. But it's important. I think that's the point of this is good on him for making note of it. And yeah, as a consumer, haptics make sense, or the importance of haptics is sometimes underrated. And the Apple Watch is something else too, where the haptics on your wrist, and that itself is a different sensation because we're used to the vibration either in our hand or in our pocket, but actually having it on our wrist is different. And it's honestly very, very satisfying.
Scrolling or typing or bouncing back and forth on things, you really feel the clicky. It's good. It's a good haptic motor.
As owner of Mint Mobile, I wanted to introduce our new family plan with a beloved member of my family, my sister-in-law.
And the under-display fingerprint reader, which also was bad on the last phone, is much faster. So it seems like Asus was at least listening about the stuff we were nitpicking about in the last ROG phone for daily use. You probably also.
And I'm not sure how I feel about under display fingerprint readers. The Samsung Galaxy S22 has one, and it's really responsive, so I'm not knocking it, but I can't say that I don't like a physical fingerprint reader, like just a separate dedicated piece of hardware. And you pick up the phone, and yeah, your thumb being on the front of the screen, it makes sense. I can't knock it, but I also can't say that putting it on the back is a bad thing either. The last phone that I had that had a fingerprint reader on the back was the Pixel 4a. My Sony, as well as my Microsoft Surface Duo, both have fingerprint readers on the side of the phone, which is fine. Yeah, nothing wrong with it. It's you're opening the Surface and boom, put your thumb right there, and it unlocks right away. And then with the Sony, yeah, you pick it up and you rest your thumb on it, and it's really responsive. But yeah, I something about that rear mounted fingerprint reader for me just is extremely satisfying. So am I going to miss it? Yeah, I will. And now that, well, they're not all gone, but for the phones that I'm probably going to buy, they're gone because the Pixel 6 series now has an under display fingerprint reader, and I'm still waiting for that Pixel 6a to come out, but that too will have an under display fingerprint reader. And of course, the iPhone has Face ID. So, I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about them. They're only going to get better. Well, at least hopefully they only get better. And then, yeah, at some point, people will just have forgotten that there was a rear-mounted fingerprint reader. So, I definitely have mixed feelings about that.
Noticed triple cameras on the back, just like the ROG 5. These are passable cameras. So they have a new 50 megapixel primary camera, like I said in here. It's given me decent images. To their credit, Asus.
And that's really where I too, as an individual consumer, have never really, I guess, nitpicked too much about smartphone camera quality. I mean, yeah, sometimes they are just really, really bad. But frequently, I'll look at the sample photos that these reviewers provide, and like the one that's on the screen right now. To me, it looks fine. I I can imagine that if we were to hold this camera up to another one, then we'd be able to see a difference. But for the average consumer, they aren't doing that. So they get the phone, they take pictures, and they're good to go. Now, when it comes to low light photography and zoomed in photos, that's really, in my opinion, and factually so, where you start seeing those differences. And then I could understand making those nitpicks because it's like, well, you can't take pictures in the dark, which in 2022 has become a feature that a lot of phones allow you to do. Of course, you have the flash, so you could turn that on, but a lot of these phone cameras now just do really, really well in low light photography. And then, of course, the different types of cameras or lenses that they end up putting on the back uh, does make a difference. And I believe, well, let's just get to it.
Usually has pretty good software tuning from my experience, but I'm getting B minus to B plus pictures in good lighting. It's just not very consistent with exposure or contrast. So some of them look fine, some of them just like flat and a little overexposed. To give you an idea, this is a Sony
Let me just let them, well, yeah, like this looks okay to me.
IMX766 sensor, the same one you see in phones like the Oppo Find X3 and the OnePlus Nord 2T, both of which are under $600. You're probably not buying this gaming phone for the cameras, but at least for the money you'd like it to be able to keep up with the other premium priced flagship phones out there.
And it's, yeah, like, I mean, he hit it right on the head right there where you're not buying that phone for the camera. And then, yeah, buying this phone for this particular price, hoping that the camera would be able to keep up with the cameras of the more expensive premium devices or the other premium devices, there's a trade-off. Like this phone has that 18 gigs of RAM. The other phones do not. It looks like this phone starts at 512 gigs of storage. Those other phones do not. So you have chosen to pay more for this phone for those other features. So if the price of this is the same as some of those other premium phones, then there had to have been trade-offs. And in this case, it sounds like the camera was one of those trade-offs.
There, and it's just a level behind. It's nipping at their heels. Matter of fact, let's just get it all in one place now. So if you were thinking about getting a phone like this and these following things don't scare you off, then it might be a good phone for you. Ready? So the camera's definitely a weakness, especially the camera layout choice. Like even if this primary camera is passable, I hate this camera layout. It's a primary camera, then a 13 megapixel ultra wide, which is a little softer and worse, whatever, that's not a shock. But then the third camera is a macro camera. Instead
Yeah. So I think he's going to say instead of an ultra wide or what is he going to say?
of an ultra wide.
Yeah. So yeah, I've owned one phone that had a macro camera on it or a macro lens, and I was like, when am I going to use this? um, and I probably did once or twice, but again, like it's not a great lens. So what you do with it, hoping to get something good out of it just doesn't happen. And what it ends up being is just a third lens on the phone. So that way the phone manufacturer can say triple cameras. And you're like, well, thanks for giving me nothing. All right. Like this last lens is useless. And I think he's going to show like the macro setting is like buried down in the settings. So the chances of anybody even using it or even knowing that it's there to use it are very, very slim to none.
And it's not even a good macro camera. So the cherry on top is they bury the macro mode like deep in the settings and like alternate photo modes. So you'll almost never actually use it. But they do prominently have a 2x button right here in the normal viewfinder, which is just a 2x crop on the main camera. You don't have a telephoto camera. Just put a telephoto camera there instead. Anyway, so that's one. Then there's no wireless charging. So they reoriented the ROG.
And I'll say wireless charging, it's not a scam. It's not. So I don't want to use that word. But I don't see the ploy. I mean, I get you might not feel like plugging your phone in and you just want to place it down on the surface and have it start charging, which is cool, but it's slower. And you can't use the phone while it's charging, which of course is what MagSafe has attempted to resolve that problem. But And at that point, it's still, I mean, it's still called wireless charging, but it's like, well, now there's clearly a cord connected to it, and it's just, yeah, I get why it's there, and it's another ploy or feature for these phone manufacturers to have and to say, but just plug the phone in. Like it you can use it and it's faster. Yes, you might not be able to just place your phone down on a surface and have it start charging, but take the additional 2 seconds, if that, to pick up the cable, plug it in, and then yes, the added benefits of it being faster charging and still being able to use the device while it charges far outweighs the illusion of convenience of being able to just place the phone down on a flat surface.
ROG Vision display on the back of the phone, it still does light up and play animations when the screen is on and when it's charging, when you have an incoming call or any other notifications. It's still super customizable and very unique to this phone, but it does mean there's no room on the back for wireless charging. So that's another thing. And then there's just the sheer size of this phone. Like, I say it every year, but it's like the biggest phone that I review. And it's not trying to be sleek at all. They've kept the huge bezels around on the top and the bottom, huge stereo front-facing speakers in there.
And I wish all manufacturers were okay with bezels. Like, there's, looking at the phone, just from a design perspective right now, there's nothing wrong with it having bezels. I don't get why manufacturers need to have their screen to body ratio as high as possible and think that that's better for consumers. I mean, I'm sure they want to tout that it is and want to minimize any type of interruptions. But if you look at the screen, there's no hole punch, there's no notch. It's just, it's not clear. It's not an edge to edge, but it's a bezel to bezel display without any interruptions. And it looks like the top and bottom are symmetrical and the sides are symmetrical. So yeah, it's a very even phone. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. And I just wish other manufacturers were okay with that, regardless of what year we're in. And I know, yeah, you want to just push that screen all the way to the edge, but why? Yeah, like I just don't get it. And if I think about that freaking 14-inch and now the 13-inch M2 MacBook Air, and then a 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, like having those notches on those laptops, it doesn't enrage me. It doesn't even baffle me. I just look at them and I'm like, why? To get that additional, what, quarter of an inch in terms of screen real estate, the width of the display, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it interrupts the flow, in my opinion. Now I've seen it in use, and I've seen like you can kind of have your menu bars up there, so now your menu bars aren't eating into your actual screen real estate. Okay, cool, whatever. But to me, it just looks bad. And I'm just like the notch on the iPhone. We'll get used to it. So there's nothing we can do about it. But all that just to go back to what I was originally saying. There is nothing wrong with bezels. I'm looking at it right now, and it looks great.
It's thick, but hey, you know what? It's a form factor where if you're gaming a lot, you spend a lot of time holding it in landscape, so you're going to need some spots for your thumbs so you don't block the screen when you're gaming. That's all good. It's got some extra thickness for extra cooling. You got...
Oh, the other thing you also mentioned were the stereo front-facing speakers. There's that's great. That's a huge feature in my opinion, because back in the day, which, this is a while ago, but there was a time where we only had that mono speaker that was downward firing, or the one on the bottom of the phone where the loudspeaker is. And it sucked that you had, like, if you're watching the video and you turn your phone into landscape, you'd have to hold it a certain way so that way you weren't blocking that one speaker. And I will continue to rave about this Sony that's now in my hand, because it has dual front-facing stereo speakers, and it's a good feature. And that was something that Marquez mentioned when he was talking about the Sony phones in his previous videos, and he added those into the list of enthusiast features. But the Sony Xperia X Compact that I have, which I've owned since 2016, I believe, so we're talking, 6 years ago, that has dual front-facing speakers, and that was just a design decision that Sony made. And you have that luxury when you have bezels. And the bezels definitely have gotten a lot smaller because I also have a Pixel 2 that I still use for random occasions. Well, really, I use it when I go to the gym. But that too had dual front facing speakers, and so did the Pixel 3. And I think when I got to the Pixel 4, it no longer had stereo front facing speakers. But it's just a good feature. And you are afforded what I would consider that luxury when you say, hey, we're going this phone that we're making, guys, is going to have bezels. And with those bezels, we're going to have a nice uninterrupted display. We're going to have a decent front-facing camera, which I don't know how good this front-facing camera is, but we're also going to have dual stereo front-facing speakers. Any disagreements with that? And there'll be that one person, well, all the other manufacturers or all the other vendors, they've either gone with a notch or they've gone with a hole punch display now. And so let them do that. And as I'm looking at this Sony Xperia, I keep talking about that phone, the Samsung Galaxy S22, it has a little hole punch, and the hole punches have gotten smaller. But even like as I'm watching his video, Marquez's video, and this video is paused, there is a bezel around his video that is just all black. And if there were a physical bezel on the screen, I wouldn't even notice that it's there. Now, when I press play, I think, well, actually, when I press play, it might go. No, it doesn't. Yeah, when I press play, it doesn't surround the entire video. I can zoom in and have it do that. But yeah, like there's nothing wrong with bezels. I think I just spent the last 3 minutes talking about bezels and front facing speakers and things that most phones don't have or try to minimize. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with it.
That extra USB port on the side, that's good for charging the 6,000 milliamp hour battery at up to 65 watts with the included charger. So that's the double play of great.
And 65 watts, you can't get that with wireless charging. I think one of the Chinese companies, I think, has something that's just out of this world. But most phones aren't coming anywhere close to that when it comes to wireless charging.
Battery life and very fast charging and a headphone jack. I mean, it's just Asus and Sony keeping headphone jacks around in their premium phones at this point. But just
Which is a good thing, I mean, even the way these two companies who aren't real players in the cell phone business, which is true, unfortunately, but the world, definitely the country, but I want to say the world was outraged when Apple took away the headphone jack. And what did we all do? We all just filed in line and bought our AirPods. I didn't, but I have bought some other Bluetooth headphones that I use. But yeah, we bitched about it all day and for weeks. And then what did everybody do? Well, let's just go buy AirPods. And I think now they're the most popular truly wireless headphones or whatever. But what would have happened if nobody bought AirPods? I think Apple would have recanted and said, you know what? We can make this phone a little thicker again. Which at this point, looking at the thickness of this iPhone 12, there's no reason that you can't put a headphone jack on it. But what, 6 to 7 years later, there's no reason to even do it because they're like, well, even if we did bring it back, who would use it? And they that is true. They killed that market and created another one, and now they dominate that market because they were just giving us those little 3.5 millimeter headphones. Then they started giving us headphones with a little lightning adapter on the end, or the little lightning connector on the end. And then I don't think the latest ones come. Actually, the latest ones might still come with that. I don't know. I'd be surprised if it did. But yeah, I honestly don't remember. But either way, they caused a problem. We bitched about it. They sold us a solution. We shut up and gave them billions of dollars. So great on Sony and great on Asus for still having a headphone jack. And I'll be honest, I still use it some. If I'm watching like a good movie on my phone, I'll plug it in. But I've also purchased a USB-C to 3.5 millimeter adapter, a little dongle. So sometimes I'll just plug that into the port. But I don't always have to because the Sony has a headphone jack. So good on them. They should be commended for it.
All this stuff takes up space. It's a big phone. So, there's like little things like the IPX4 water resistance rating isn't quite up to flagships of this price. Might not matter to you unless you get really really sweaty while gaming. I don't know. But overall, ROG Phone 6 Pro at the top of the lineup is a great overall bump up from ROG 5 Ultimate. That's what they were calling it. So, yeah, it's a great high-end, super performance-oriented.
And I always have to ask though, because when I hear words I guess are they adjectives? Pro, ultimate, max, whatever. I don't think I can call them superlatives, but I'll just call them adjectives. So things that are describing the particular model. What does it actually mean? I mean, like if it's like if this phone is a gaming phone, what is the non-pro variant? I mean, what is that then lacking? And then at that point, is that still a gaming phone? Or I mean, I could go to the website. I'm not going to, but I am surprised that, well, I would be surprised if there is an ROG Phone 6 non-pro edition, and it's like, oh well, that's for just casual gamers, people who don't need the full power of a smartphone with 18 gigs of RAM. Then it's like, well, why did you make both of these? I don't know. So, is there a non-pro version of this phone? And last year or whenever the 5 came out, was there a non-ultimate version of it as well? Because then it's like, who was that one for? Because if you're a gamer, I'd assume you want the best one. And if you're not a gamer, then you're just not buying this phone at all. So I feel like these manufacturers should just slap titles onto their devices and call them whatever they want to call them. And words are losing their meaning. So pro, anything can be pro now.
Phone wrapped in a cyberpunk package with text printed all over it. And it happens to be a pretty good daily phone too, if those couple of things don't get to you. And there's going to be people always out there who want the crazy, exotic McLaren or hardcore Lamborghini, stiff suspension, real tight steering and handling. And that's fine, but I guess the difference is in the car world, people who get cars like that usually have a different car that they drive most of the time daily, and then they have the fun car. But for a phone, you typically just have one phone, so you need it to do double duty.
And even as I mentioned before, it's in that supercar or sports car comparison, which again, I am not a car person, but everything he just said is like 100% true. That, yeah, you might have that super fun, super stiff suspension, super tight handling vehicle, and then you have an everyday driver. When it comes to smartphones, what would be an example of that super stiff suspension, that sports car that you wouldn't want? And the way that the phone has to be manufactured and the software implementations have to make it so that it does all of the bare minimums that you'd need a phone to do anyway, because it's running only one of two operating systems, really. And then, of course, when it does that, it's like, well, yeah, it makes calls, it sends text messages, I can browse the web, check my email, I have access to the App Store, navigation, GPS, I can listen to music. It does all those things. And you only build onto that. So I'd be curious, what's an example of a phone that doesn't meet those minimum requirements, that truly is either an enthusiast phone or a special phone that is specific for doing this one task, and for some reason you can't even put like a SIM card in it? Because once if you can put a SIM card in it, it's going to do everything that you needed to do for the most part. SIM card, check. Access to Google Play services, check. After that, I'm just like, well, what else do you need it to do? If we're talking about just the bare minimum for a phone to be a smartphone in 2022. This is an example of a phone going well above that, of course. But again, what's an example of a phone that doesn't even meet those bare minimum specifications?
So I do think the softening of this gamer phone into a more palatable daily phone and more well-rounded phone is a good thing. So yeah, props to Asus for that.
And I guess I should maybe go see what the ROG 5 phone is like, but I'm not going to do it. So maybe the answer to my question would be the previous generation of this phone.
Good looks. Either way, that's been it. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.
So I always do get excited when I come to the end of one of these, his or anybody else's, because I see how much of them. Jesus, we're almost at 45 minutes. His video was 9, so I feel like I definitely had a bunch of opinions about what was said, And I highly doubt anybody actually makes it this far. So I'm okay with that. He is about to hit, I think, 16 million subscribers, I think. I think I currently have 10. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this one up just past the 45-minute mark. And that is it. A phone that I wouldn't buy, a phone that you might buy, but at the end of the day, it definitely meets all the minimum requirements for what a smartphone in 2022 should do with a bunch of added specs. So is this just a gaming phone? No, can be an everyday driver, but I definitely feel the title, just based off of his previous stuff, could have been using the word enthusiast in the title somehow definitely would have made me feel good. Not that that matters.